And I'm going to start the bidding here at £5 million. £5 million, £5,500,000, £6 million now, £6 million, £6,500,000, £7 million now, £7 million.
In the art world, we're down and out, we're down and out, we're down and out. In the art world, we're down and out, we're down and out, we're down and out. In the art world.
Okay, hey, welcome to the first edition of Down and Out in the Art World with myself, Mike Watson, and artist Bobby Dowler. So basically, we're going to start talking about being working class, being poor, being down and out in the art world, and giving over reflections and tips to the financially challenged on how to navigate the openings, fairs, sales, and how to stay alive, and basically how to eat as an artist or critic, curator in the art world today. So we thought we'd start with an introductory show on simply being down and out in the art world, what that means, and the kind of challenges that might arise, with an introduction to us and our own experiences. So I'm Mike Watson, critic, theorist, and curator. I'm from the UK, but lived 10 years in Rome, Italy, with a brief spell of 6 months in Venice. And I basically became a critic and curator in Italy shortly after finishing my doctorate, which I actually was studying in London in the Goldsmiths College. And I, through kind of a kind of initial start as a critic for magazines like Art Review and Frieze, I ended up quite quickly becoming a curator for a number of foundations and galleries in Rome, and curating projects at the Venice Biennale in 2013 and 2015, and actually Manifesta, I think it was 2018, in Palermo in Sicily. And I then kind of ended up being, around that time, a couple of years before, a professor in 2 universities in Rome, Italy, 2 American universities, and then at some point moved to Finland, where I am now, where I'm a kind of visiting lecturer, and I continue writing, but more as a media theorist, with a strong interest in the art world. In actual fact, my last book, Can the Left Learn to Meme, out with 0 Books, talks about why one might consider media, new media, memes to be the rightful place of a kind of horizontal artistic expression over the art world, but it's still retain 1 foot, or at least a big toe, and maybe 2 other toes of 1 foot in the art world, and still write as a critic and curate things occasionally. So I'm still going to be talking about the art world, and that's me. And Bobby Dowler will now present himself. Bobby.
Hi there. Hi everyone. Thanks, Mike. Yes, my biography is a bit different to Mike, but has some kind of crossovers. I spent 3 years studying film studies in Southampton and did an Erasmus in Austria. And then I moved into a squat with some friends of mine in Peckham, southeast London. And I didn't have any ambitions really to get into the art world, but I did a foundation course in art. And then I started basically putting on exhibitions with my friends in my squat, because it was very big. And I had a sort of informal agreement. It even became quite formal agreement with the landlord, which meant that I basically had control and I could do what I wanted in a way. And through that, I met like my future gallerist, who's quite well known in London now, Hannah Barry, to kind of get by and, explore the art world a bit more, get to understand the art world. I moved to Paris in about 6 years ago now, and I've lived in I think about 8 different places, and had to move my studio quite a few times, and had quite an eventful kind of life here.
Yeah, just to chime in there. So we met. You said we met in Rome, and then now you're in Paris. Anyway, we met in Rome, and we quite quickly established a kind of what ended up being, I suppose, a friendship. But we ended up quite quickly establishing that we were both kind of down and out in the art world, so to speak, that we both didn't have a lot of money. I think at that point you lent me money, but we had the same experience of being in the art world, but quite clearly being a lot less well off than many other people. So I think at this point in Rome, I'd started to realize that basically anyone who was also working in the art world that I knew from Italy was middle class and quite often kind of upper bourgeois. And it's a thing I kept saying to people, like, hey, did you realize that, you know, Paolo, whoever, is an aristocrat? And then I'd be speaking to somebody, I don't know, called, who knows, think of an Italian name without incriminating myself by mentioning someone specific, but let's say Fabrizio. So I'd be saying to Fabrizio, you know, did you realize Paolo's an aristocrat? Then I'd say the next day, I'd say to Simone, I was telling Fabrizio that Paolo's an aristocrat, and he would say, yeah, but did you know that Fabrizio is also an aristocrat? So I was getting in all this trouble, but people would never actually tell you outright. So unfortunately, the kind of upper echelons of the art world, I suppose, not surprisingly on reflection, in Rome are entirely upper bourgeois to literal aristocracy, and no one in the art world is just from pure working class background, because for one, you get paid about $1,000 a month maximum for a museum job. I mean, you know, aside from the permanent curator and director, but I think the director of the Uffizi, which has Michelangelo's David in Florence, said he was only on 2,000 euros a month. Can you imagine, to direct the entire Uffizi? So this is something you can't do unless you have a middle class background. And there's a thing of property inheritance in Italy, where many people from a lower middle class background, even some working class people, will get properties coming down from their grandparents when they pass on, so, or money to buy properties. So you get this whole class of people that don't need to pay rent, who can work for really poor pay, from 600 to 1,000, 1,200, you know, for a gallery foundation job or something. So this was something that was just striking me, because I didn't have any family money, and often I had no savings, and there's no welfare in Italy practically. So I noticed it, and I met Bobby, who also was noticing this stuff. So I don't know exactly where we met, but we were at a number of kind of gallery openings and things. And so this is like years later. So I guess that was like 6-8 years ago, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think there was something also which we had in common, which was that we were obviously both willing to take the risk of that, you know, of you know, living month to month or day by day, you know, depending, like, you know, not having access to a regular money.
It felt like the only way, really. It's like, why have you take a risk now in what were my early 30s? I'm not sure what your age was, but either you take a risk now and just go all out and push to you know, to get the gigs, the curatorial gigs, the gigs as a painter, you know, the exhibitions in your case. Either you do that, or you don't do that, and you're never going to make it. So you go all out and you risk not paying your rent, you risk losing a house, you risk, I mean, you know, losing a house, I mean, the house you rent, you risk not knowing where the food's going to be coming from, quite literally some days. Although, you know, I could probably hit up my dad for 20 euros. I mean, he's British, but he would have sent me 20 quid, I guess. But what would have appeared as euros in my bank every week or 2 weeks if I was really hard up. But of course, one doesn't really want to do that, and that's not living it up off your parents' wealth. That's like that's like the absolute minimum one would expect. You know, most poor people could probably hit someone up for 20 quid now and then. But you know, really getting in these at the limit situations, like not going home for Christmas, spending it on your own with you know, some canned vegetables or something, in my case 1 year, or actually one position, which is the one I like to tell people, or I prefer not to, but it's a good example. It's written somewhere in an essay in the Art Leaks publication, which you can find online, one of those, an edition of Art Leaks, which is like a WikiLeaks type thing for the art world. I mentioned it there already, so I'll say it. There was one occasion in which I couldn't go to private views. People were asking me to go to private views because I was a correspondent or a correspondent for Frieze in Italy, and Art Review used to call me their Italy correspondent. But I couldn't actually, and this is no fault of either magazine, I must stress, but I couldn't actually go to private views that gallerists were inviting me to, because I actually had a hole in my last pair of shoes, and at that very point couldn't afford a new pair of shoes. And there were shoe shops nearby that were budget, that you could have paid for a crappy pair. You could have paid 25 euros for a crappy pair, but I didn't have that. I couldn't buy the shoes and eat, pay rent, etc. So I couldn't go out, which is something quite incredible. You think if someone is at that point, I had curated at the biennial already, and I was writing for 2 major magazines, and nobody would have believed that scenario, or they would have thought it was highly weird and irresponsible, because everyone in the art world around me had money. So you get in this position of awkwardness where you can't really tell people the situation you're in. So this is the kind of thing I think, Bobby, you found as well. It's like, it's not like blaming our peers who may or may not be, or who are probably mostly middle class, undoubtedly, in fact. It's just a situation of the class system, and effect is this kind of sense of awkwardness that one is made to feel, or kind of an embarrassment as a poorer person.
Yeah, indeed. I think what you're saying is true, and there is a lot of shame attached to those kind of those experiences, or those feelings of not being able to keep up, or not basically, for example, being invited to go to a restaurant with by some people in the art world, and not knowing if it was like the gallerist paying or not, and knowing that basically you couldn't basically like go to that restaurant and be expected to pay for your electricity, your next electricity bill. So there's it's very difficult, and shame, when there's like shame attached, people don't want to talk about class so much in the art world, maybe a bit more now, but even for someone that feels identifies with being from a working class background, I mean, even asking for money from your parents or family members is it's a huge kind of shameful act, because you're supposed to be a guy. Most of the guys in your family probably worked in factories, and for you to basically like not be able to look after yourself, let alone a small family, that means that it's sort of it's a sort of emasculating position to be in. So actually admitting how bad things can get is big news, and that that is compounded when you're not paid on time or at all, which I think we both experienced that, and many freelancers outside of the art world do experience that, but in particular that's one of the hardest things.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to that, I think this whole etiquette about like going for dinner or this kind of thing, where people will say after an exhibition opening, there's an awkward moment where this happens in Italy, actually, possibly more than the UK, where a gallerist starts to try and pick out the people from the opening who will be joining them for dinner, which will be often paid. And so they'll start kind of pointing at people. And this is, for one, awkward because they end up breaking up people who went to the gallery together. So like they want, some guy who writes for a magazine, but they don't want his group of friends. So this is kind of all very snobby and quite weird anyway. And I think that should really be addressed, because it's something that just is cringe for, but it goes on. But then when you get asked to the gallery, they say, or they are asked to the gallery after meal, they might say, oh, come to this restaurant. You're invited, be our guest. And actually it turns out, whether it is said in Italian or English, this means we're paying on the whole. This means we're paying. But if you don't know that kind of codified language that only operates in these circles, you're not going to really know who's paying. And that becomes a problem if you've got no money in your bank, because then then it's embarrassing potentially if you end up having to pay at the end and you don't have the money. So you end up maybe asking questions like, okay, but I don't have any money. And they'd be like, but come along, you're invited. And this you're invited does mean we're paying normally. But, you start to think, well, hang on, they're not getting my point. They keep saying, come along, you're invited. But I'm saying there's no money. So you end up saying like things like, I've literally got no money. They'll be like, well, if you need money, then we'll go to the bank account. We'll go to the bank machine. I've got no money in my bank. I've actually said that to somebody once.
Mhm.
And they were really like, why? What happened? Because they don't get, how it's possible that somebody would have no money. And I've actually had a landlord who was in the art world who once told me that he thought I was making up that I had no money because I was like 2 days late paying the rent. And he said, this doesn't happen in 2014. It's like, what do you mean? People don't have, there's no one who had no money in 2014. So you get these awkward situations. And actually, there's a funny situation. I remember when I went to Uno Sunove gallery and had an opening. They had an opening, and I was there just as me, but I was known as a critic. I was known as a critic, who wrote for large magazines. And I was asked after dinner by the gallerist, who's a very nice guy, always was very warm and one of the more straightforward gallerists I've encountered. But it was never said that none of this kind of conversation happened about you're invited or who's paying or whatever. And so I got quite used to just being offered meals and not like doing anything, like even pretending to get my wallet out at the end, not even making like fake gestures that I might pay, and it would just all be paid. So this time I was like quite confident that this is what's happening. Like there's no worries here. Then at the end of the meal, everyone got up and went to pay. It wasn't the typical Italian situation where people will come and give you the bill at the table. Everyone went up like in single file and told them like I had the pizza margarita with 2 glasses of red wine or whatever, and then paid. And I just thought, oh shit, I'm like really in a situation here because I might have to say in front of everyone that I can't pay my meal. So not knowing the situation, whilst the gallerist was in the toilet, I just did a runner and actually went calmly out of the trattoria, the restaurant, and just ran the nearest corner and then made a phone call to a friend so that if anyone had seen me from behind and called after me, I would have the excuse that I'm on my phone. So actually, apologies to the gallerist, I actually did do a runner on a meal, and maybe he would have paid, but this is a situation that obviously would be hard to understand for many people. So that could seem just like rudeness, and was a bit rude. But what makes this kind of unfair, what makes this lopsided, is that it's just a situation that you wouldn't be in if your parents had always had money. If you had money, as they would say, behind you or at your back. In Italian, you might say money, someone at your back or someone holding your back. Or in English, you'd say someone's got your back. But anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, I was just saying, I was just going to say that it's a kind of, it's inspired by desperation. Like the situation inspired by desperation. But also, I think people like maybe they can, like, it's possible to underestimate like how important those sort of occasions are as well. I mean, it's kind of commonly known in the art world that that everything is happening, like at the kind of restaurant afterwards. It's a networking kind of occasion. And if you're a freelancer, if you're, or in a position that you were, or if you are like in a position that I am, and if I don't go to the dinner, then it means that I'm basically someone saying to me like, do you want to be part of the art world? And then if I say no, then I don't know if I'm going to have another invitation like that for a few years. So it's a very difficult kind of situation to be in if you want to be part of the art world.
Well, there is that. I mean, there was actually an occasion where I didn't go to the dinner of the after party of the exhibition I curated, and that was a real kind of, I think it was seen as a real statement against the gallerist. I was actually teaching the next morning in university, and I just felt I didn't want to be up for a few more hours. I'd done 2 openings in, I think, 2 days, because it was a double solo show of Oliver Resler in Fondazione Pastorificio Cedere in Rome and the gallery apart. So there was this artist opening across 2 sites, and I curated it all. And what happened is that day I got an electric bill in my flat in Rome, an electricity bill for €500, and it basically just took my fee before I'd even been paid, and my fee was low because I agreed to do it for not a great price because I'd done other shows for this gallery before, and they'd always been generous, and it was just a situation where someone has to be flexible sometimes. Okay, we accept this, but the bill ate up any money I would have got. But I was getting a regular wage, salary, wage, whatever you call it, from the university. So that, and it was okay, but I wasn't expecting this €500 bill. So I'm finding it hard to be happy in the opening, because what happened is the bill kept arriving, and it kept saying the address given was for an old apartment, actually, that was given to me by a foundation for 1 year as a part of residency in Rome. And I kept thinking, what they're saying is this bill was for that address, but what it actually said, because while I speak Italian, like some of the kind of officialized language used, I'm not familiar with, or the context kind of throws me off. It actually was saying I think it was the address of my identity card, not the address that I was living at the time, because I should have updated my address for the identity card, but I never did anyway. So I was just thinking this bill that kept coming back to me, getting higher and higher, was for actually the owners of this apartment who ran a foundation. So I kept emailing them saying, put this bill in your name, kind of getting angry. Then suddenly realized finding that was always me, and it was for my current address. So suddenly my electric got cut off, and I had to deal with this exhibition opening and do an exhibition the next day. So actually, the day after there was an opening in Fondazione Pastificio Curator, this foundation, which I went to the after party of, the after dinner of, I refused to go to the after dinner of the gallery hosting the second event. And I think that looked pretty bad. But again, a situation that one doesn't expect to find themselves in. Well, you wouldn't find yourself in maybe if you had more money, for sure. Although that was partly, I have to say, an issue of me not understanding the bill I was getting sent.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the points is that not living day to day and not having a regular amount come into your account means extra hurdles to jump over. And I mean, I can just think back to not even that long ago where I had repeat kind of situations where people would be saying oh, could you sending me a message when you're outside, or and it was very hard for me to try and explain to people that I didn't have internet data, and it's like, why don't you have internet data? Well, because I can't actually afford it at the moment. You know what I mean? So you can't reply to messages. You can't be online.
No, I mean, everyday life is made harder, and then the small unpredictable situations can just completely incapacitate you, like getting a bill suddenly for a large amount of money. But also this thing you're talking about, internet. This is what people don't understand about the economics of being poor. Is, for example, when I had I had very little money at one point, even after finishing a large scale project. And then a kind of prominent gallery show, finding myself suddenly with no money and living in a house with fairly poor internet. So not being able to do my normal freelance kind of job on the computer, which would require internet. But what I could do is I could use internet outside on my phone when I could get reception, because this house was kind of partially underground. So when I could go outside, I could get reception, but only if I paid this. It was something like €2 a day for internet on your phone, but you'd have to go and top up at least €5 to have the €2. So you could then use that €2 2 days in a row to top up your daily internet, and then you'd have €1 left, so you'd have to go and buy another 5. So this all required having this extra €5 every 2 or 3 days, and then topping up your kind of daily internet use, so I could get as a pay-as-you-go use. But I was scrabbling around for €20 here, €20 there, doing private English lessons, which I advertised occasionally when I was in difficulty, trying to get paid cash in hand by the client. But you had the clients that were like, I'd rather pay every month or whatever. So actually finding myself often without internet, where of course, if I had money, I would have got a contract. I would have paid maybe 20, €25 a month for internet the whole month. You see what I mean? So this is where The thing of like, you can easily eat well on 40 euros a week. Well, not really, because if you don't have much money, you're not likely to be going and doing the 40 euro bulk shop at a supermarket. You're likely to be wanting to like kind of spread your money through the week. So you might be getting small amounts of money through the week if you're a freelancer, and you're going like, I'm really hungry, I'll get a microwave meal, rather than, hey, I've got 20 quid, I'm going to spend this all on like loads of rice, pasta, tomatoes and whatever, because then you haven't got the bus pass the next day or bus ticket. You see what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, and it's called a kind of a poverty trap, I suppose, and one that I've found myself in quite a few times over the years. I mean, this is relative as well, because obviously, we are in a privileged position compared to most people in the world. But I suppose like the difference is that well, it's not a difference, but the relativity is that rent costs are high, bills are high. We have contracts, and if we don't service our debts, then it can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And from there, I think it could be interesting to talk about like what are the possible kind of coping strategies. Are we doing something wrong, or is it a political kind of reason that we find ourselves in this kind of situation?
Well, this is where it's really worth reading around economics and political theory, and then kind of from that understanding that this is systemic. It's not really your own fault that you're poor. It's not your own fault that you can't keep up with your art world peers, or that you feel embarrassed, this sense of alienation that comes from not being able to afford things, this kind of lower status by being dependent on gallerists and maybe collectors and whoever around you. This is something that arises from a hierarchical system, call it capitalist. I guess this problem existed in other systems, but we certainly have a system very much driven by status, and the art world is very much about status. I mean, it's really there to create status, to make certain artists seem more appealing, to give their artworks value. It's not the only art that exists in the officialized art world that revolves around a few fairs, a few biennials, and a few magazines and museums and galleries. That's not the only art world, but it's the officialized one, because it's a one that is there to give officialdom, to give the stamp of officialdom to certain artists, to make them saleable and to make them somehow intermesh with the world of finance generally, which involves also houses and stocks and shares and wine and whatever you can invest in. So it's important to remember that this whole thing of like, are you one of the ones that's going to be picked for the after show meal? Wait around to see if you're picked by the gallerist to go to that meal. All that weirdness is coming around because that's what the whole thing's about, and you're getting to feel weird because it's about that, and maybe that's quite a messed up situation. So I think it is important to ask yourselves those kind of questions, as you were saying, and then I don't think that I think from there one could say you should become a socialist or a communist or an anarchist or support Bernie Sanders or whoever. Not that would do you an awful lot of good right now after Biden's anyway become president, but I don't know that I want to be saying those kind of things so directly in this particular podcast, as in what we're doing here, down and out in the art world. But I think it's very important that we remember that there's something that's systemic, and it's not you that's just a big weirdo.
Yeah, it's very tricky at the moment as well to find extra jobs, because I think that's what most people do. I mean, certainly like me, I have lots of different freelance jobs which sometimes come up and I jump on them, but all of these different kind of freelance jobs that you kind of need flexible freelance work if you're an artist, because otherwise you won't have the time to do your own work. I was is this a, like what is a good strategy for coping with these situations?
I don't know. I asked myself this question. I mean, there's that whole thing of feeling awkward at events. There's difficulty in keeping up with your peers, etc. I think precisely that, realizing that it's systemic. I suppose finding like-minded people does help you. I think you have to ask also, do you want to be part of the contemporary art world, which I suppose is the officialized art world, is what's become known as the contemporary art world. What's that necessary for? Why you need to be accepted as part of that? Because obviously there's a lot of credible artists that don't really fit the mold. A lot of people making stuff like all over the internet, for example, that aren't part of the art world, and then a lot of stuff that becomes part of the art world that gets co-opted by it, that isn't strictly art, that is kind of a little bit ruined by being incorporated into the art world. So you got to know your motivations. Why are you in it? I mean, I wrote for magazines, I still do. It's a way of getting published. It gives you a voice. So if you're a writer, you're trying to get seen. If you're a painter, you're trying to get seen. Does that mean you need to take on all of the nonsense of the art world? Is it possible to be there, to appreciate that your gallerists are probably to some degree capitalist, or they're trying to make a profit, to work with that and to get what you need without giving your whole kind of being over to it, without worrying too much? I mean, can one go to an opening, appreciate there's a certain amount of nonsense at a gallery opening, and it depends, it differs from country to country, but I think English gallery openings, there's a bit more something for everyone. You get like the lowly artists who are never going to be part of the system, who go and they get the free beer. You get the ones that are more integrated, who maybe go and they're aiming to talk to certain gallerists and go to the after party and whatever, and maybe they're going to make contacts that will help them make a sale. In the Rome art world, it's a bit more elitist, I find. In Paris, I imagine there's maybe this elitist aspect. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's pretty elitist, and I think in London it can become like that as well. And yeah, I think that maybe people don't. I mean, from the outside, it can look more. There's a big part of like how the art world works is a confidence trick, I think. And there is this kind of feeling that people are buying, but actually, it only needs to be a very, very small amount of people. So. So yeah, eventually it's I suppose it's becoming more demystified now, but it's not all celebrations and sales 95% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing is to go there knowing why you're going. I certainly had no problem with the art world when I was just going to hang out at private views. And you meet people. In my very early days writing for magazines, I didn't really go to private views apart from to meet a friend in the art world who was also English in Rome. We would hang about, we would see a bit of the art, we would watch the people who were generally all like really dressed up and really putting on their best kind of postures for the evening.
Yeah.
But we didn't really have to get involved in it. I could go to the exhibitions when I was writing on them anonymously another time. And then I think, one could probably do that for a long time, but there's a certain perk to getting involved, because then you get invited to the dinners. I used to go to the dinners because I couldn't eat at home. I didn't have any money, so I would go to the after party dinners and eat really well sometimes. But then if you get really drawn into that, you might start comparing yourself, questioning, why can't I keep up with these people? Why do I seem more under pressure or more under stress? And obviously there's some stress-rich people as well, but you're talking about stress which is brought about through the economic system or your economic situation. But I think one can maybe be a bit careful about how much they're getting drawn into that.
Indeed. I mean, there's this saying which is that there's no such thing as a free meal, and I think it is very. It can be a very nice thing to meet with a few of your friends and go to an opening. There's a bit of art in the background. You can discuss it. you know, and you can have a few beers or a glass of wine, maybe some champagne even, and some nice kind of, maybe there's even some nice nibbles. But yeah, there is always this thing which is like, what is the exchange? And I think, you know, commercial galleries kind of pride themselves on being this sort of public, you know, something which is for everyone, not just for like collectors. So like the compensation is like, you know, when people come to the private views, you know, then you offer them a drink, you know. And yeah, sadly, it's not always like that. You know, many times you'll go and then, you know, there's just a total feeling of awkwardness. You arrive and there's, you know, there's no drinks available, and you kind of realize that, you know, you wouldn't be there. You wouldn't go to meet your friends just to go and see this show on a Thursday night when, you know, the place is a bit crowded and there's no drinks. I mean, why would you do that? I mean, you just end up having to go to, you know, a cheap place to have like a few beers if one exists, or just, you know, go to a corner shop and buy, you know, cans.
Yeah, I mean, there was always a great sense of liberation in not going to those things. I sometimes found I started to say no, and you just get some cans of beer when I was drinking. I'm not at the moment. And, you know, maybe get a kebab or something, maybe with a few friends or whatever. That could be liberating. Then you can decide, like, you're going to this after party, you're not going to this other one. You know, you make your choices. You know why you've chosen one and not the other. You know, bearing in mind you might then deal with somebody wondering why you didn't go to their after dinner or something. But I don't think you can worry too much about that. You have to just choose which, you know, what you want to go to. But I think the whole thing kind of really rests on knowing what you're doing. This is an industry. You know, these galleries are shop windows. The after party is something about sales, maybe the, you know, sales, or, you know, obviously impressing certain people. Also, like having a nice time, you know, with the friends of the host. Presumably, they invite some people they actually like. But this is, you know, this is a job, kind of. Well, it is a job. There's a reason why it's happening. So maybe if you see all this in its proper economic context, it can be a lot easier to deal with. And then, you know, in terms of anxiety, then social anxieties, which maybe are exacerbated by economics, well, then I suppose you have to work out whether is that something that you need to be dealing with generally in your life. You know what I mean? I mean, a lot of people actually say that private views freak them out, and they don't like the way that the art world is so oriented around being sociable, because a lot of people, you know, are introverts in the art world. You know, that's that you can deal with for years, of just feeling inadequate because you don't like these events. You feel claustrophobic, you feel just generally anxious, maybe your heart starts beating or whatever, sweats or whatever when you go to these openings and things. You might, as a result, just like drink a lot of the free wine or whatever. Are these things that you need to address in your wider life? Because you might be feeling like that in any industry. Industries have parties and events. It's partly how they function. So that, you know, there is that. Like, there are coping strategies for anxiety that are simpler than just like damning the whole art world and saying they're all a bunch of shits because they like throwing parties. I mean, that's like, you know, that's unfortunately what extroverts and what business people do, partly. So there's a lot of different angles. I think one has to look after themselves to some degree, and think about what's good for them. Go to the openings that are good for you. Remember why you're there. If you're there to steal the wine and have a good time, then that's great. It's probably the easiest thing. If you're there to like make contacts, then treat that as like, you know, maybe an extension of your work. Have a couple of glasses, you know, target the people you want to speak to. We can go on to like this and other editions of how you would really approach this, but doesn't have to be like a terrible experience. But you realize that, you know, that's part of your work. So, you know, I think one has to choose. Are you going to have fun, or are you going to like go and target people and like make contacts and friends, or are you, you know, they're both things you can do. Going there and just having panic attacks is not probably worth your time.
Quite Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I know that's much of a coping strategy, but I think that all goes back to like, should we be looking at this in its economic context, both societally, but also in relation to the art world, or a situation of like going to galleries to meet people. I think once you see it like that, then things become a little bit easier. I think like attacks on bourgeois people are actually, I think they're kind of inevitable if you're poor in the art world. I know a few people in the art world who don't have lots of money, and we do have some great laughs talking about just how bizarre the middle class people can be. But you know, at the end of the day, this is all an economic relation anyway, that they're also somehow involved in the economic relation. So I think, you know, where you start to complain about class, and I've run not you, but one can complain about class, and I've run a few projects on social class in the art world, then there's this inevitability that you're rubbing some people up the wrong way, because you're complaining, you know, about, for example, middle class people, and you know, but by doing that, you're sort of suggesting, okay, there's these people who their parents have their back, they give them money, or you know, they got paid a good education, or they went to a private school, so they talk the right way, or whatever, and they have it to some degree easy. Whereas there's us who've had to like really work our way up, and we're still working, you know, just to kind of maintain our positions as people in the cultural field widely. You know, same in academia. You have like the adjunct professors who are working class, and those who are middle class who are doing it as like an extra job, as a hobby more. But the thing is, here, what you end up saying inadvertently is, we're here because we've really worked and we deserve it, us working class types, whereas the middle class types are here just because they're middle class, and it's like their birthright. So logically, they might not be as good as us. And I think by doing that, you're alienating people naturally. Having done it for years, they're not probably going to like it. So I can see some of the kickback that can come out of these discussions on being poor in the art world. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a tricky position, I think, because I mean, it's there's a sort of like, I suppose there's a kind of like a social climb, you know, going on, which is like, if someone identifies them being from like a working class world, then when you go into the middle class world, you know, you're not always sure of yourself. I mean, it seems like self-esteem is a bit fragile in those situations, and you there is always this threat that, you know, in your mind, that basically, you know, not only might you end up, you know, with a factory job. I mean, I've been offered like factory jobs twice in the last year, I would say. I've been offered, and they're just jobs that really don't suit my kind of skill set at all. At the same time, you know, I could people might say that, oh, why don't you get a job in a supermarket? So that's how kind of like the fragile the situation is for artists from working class backgrounds. It's very much like, you know, if you make a wrong step, you are going to be, you know, then like in it, if you make a wrong step, then the best that could happen is that you end up getting a full-time job, you know, in a working class, you know, proper working class job. Obviously, like, there's a situation that even those kind of jobs are becoming more scarce now. So, you know, not only do you have to prepare a CV for jobs like that, but you also have to prepare a CV for, you know, multiple other jobs, and, you know, always hustling for so many different things, that it just means that, you know, if you are actually participating in the art world, certainly like from my experience, then you are taking that enormous risk, and there can be, you know, not just pushback from other people, but, you know, serious like consequences.
You mean in raising class issues?
No, in like there are serious consequences just because of our participation in that world. You know, it's a different type of risk if we are trying to, you know, participate in the art world. I mean, we really must love what we do. and hopefully
Sorry, the risk entailed in being in the art world when you're a poor person, because you're risking financial destitution and things like this.
exactly, yeah.
I mean, there is that. Yeah, exactly. This is one of the things that is why I think I often want to kind of make clear my background, or the problems that can be suffered by people from poor backgrounds. It's not really because I want to complain about my lack of privilege, because I think, obviously, as you said earlier, we are very privileged being in the West. That already privileges us hugely. And you think about the stuff we have, the running water, the food, the heating, internet when we have it, etc. Podcasts, microphones, computers, etc., etc. And people didn't have all this stuff like in the 80s, even though I think economically the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger, and I think there's something going seriously wrong. But we have to admit they didn't have this stuff. I mean, monarchs didn't have what we have like 200 years ago. They may have had palaces, but I mean, the ease at which we get constant food and whatever, is better than rich people in the past. So I mean, okay, we are fairly privileged. We're both white and English as well, and men. So yeah, I admit all that. But the thing is, I know that it's very hard also to be in this world as someone who hasn't got family money. And then I am someone who can speak because I got to write for Frieze and Art Review, and then I published with Zero Books. And, I have this little other podcast going in the YouTube channel. And, I'm kind of a little bit known, or I've done enough stuff to feel I've got some status, so I'm kind of thinking there's all these other people from my background that didn't get to do the same things. That, I didn't get any help paying my tuition at a master's and PhD, quite low tuition back then, but I did it somehow. I got the parental support emotionally or something, and I did it. And I want to turn around, and I don't want to turn around and go, I got here and then close the door behind me, which is what a lot of people do incidentally. I want to keep the door open and find ways of getting other people who are poor to come in. And I think it is important to point out to wealthier people, look at how much struggle some people have to go through to be in the art world. I mean, maybe they're privileged to an extent and they could just not be in the art world because they're in the West. But I mean, come on, if your whole feeling is that you want to make art and you're quite good at it, then shouldn't you deserve to be in the art world? And wouldn't that be emotionally disturbing to not be allowed in the art world because your parents don't have money? So I think people should be aware of the plight and the sacrifice or risk, as you say. And yeah, I mean, if we can make people aware without saying that, you're an inveterate shyster because you're middle class and you've got a gallery job, we're not saying that, but I suppose it's this balancing act. And it could be an interesting, podcast trying to work out how to address these kind of issues.
Yeah, quite. There should be a health risk attached to advertisements or to ideas about becoming an artist if you're not from a more middle class background, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's an issue of invalidation or not being validated as a person. And I think people feel a bit uncomfortable around people who are struggling, people who are visibly struggling or looking somehow desperate. There's a kind of, people who openly have no money. There's kind of a feeling of alarm towards them or about them from people who do have money. I don't know why it embarrasses people. I don't know. Sometimes you get wealthier people in the art world that they seem like they don't want to talk about these issues, but it seems more about they don't want to admit that they do have money, and you get this whole awkwardness about conversations around money that somehow it's the working class who will happily shout about having no money, which is actually the more embarrassing situation. Whereas the middle class really just want to get out of the room as quickly as money is mentioned. This is kind of a weird thing, and it does come a bit from their privilege and not wanting to share. So it's a difficult thing, not wanting to share, not wanting to be open about the fact that they have the money, and if people knew, they might be trying to get their money off them, or if people knew, they might be thinking, well, hey, you're only in the art world because you have money. Going back to this thing I mentioned earlier, I don't know, and I kind of feel a bit in two minds about this, because there's the one, as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to make them feel bad. It is all systemic. On the other hand, like, people in any position, they do have the ability to choose how to act. So I mean, you can be the middle class person ignoring the plight of poorer people, or you could be the one that says, I realize how hard you have it. I appreciate that I've been privileged. I mean, we've just said we're privileged, and we're not even that privileged in our own societies. But you don't often see this from somebody who's doing a lot better. So that's where, and there's also this whole thing of like the people who are middle class, who run the art establishments, the galleries, who then they want people to work for them, and they're like, oh, I can only afford X many euros an hour, or pounds, or dollars. Anything more would be too much. Oh no, I can't afford your bus ticket when you've got an unpaid intern. And it's just blatantly not true, because then in the same breath, or later on in the same day, they're saying, oh, I've got to buy my daughter a new car, so I've got no money. But they're still buying the new car, so they must have some money. They're not buying the new car and then not able to pay their rent or buy food. There's no way they've got 12,000 euros left in the world and they're spending it all on a new car, and then they're going to be destitute. So you can't buy this bullshit that, yeah, you're running exhibitions month on month, how much are they costing you, but you can't afford to pay a little bit more to your workers or pay them anything. So there is this kind of thing of like, we don't have any money. You often hear from middle class people like, we're having tough times, and then they're not in the same sense that you are. So then, isn't that a little bit rude on their part? Because there is this thing of like, oh well, they don't have much cash flow. They've got 4 houses, but they don't have much cash flow. Oh, my heart bleeds. You have to understand the economics of the rich. It's not how you imagine. But this is all nonsense, because it's like the person who the gallerist who they turn over in a year 400,000 euros, but you have to understand that they only keep 50,000 of it. Well, hell, that's 50,000 more than I keep. So it's like, I don't really buy a lot of this kind of why we shouldn't be annoyed at the middle class. I think that they need to be thinking a bit. It does come down to base exploitation, and this is where I would go back to. One needs to know some economics. That is a simple capitalist ploy of getting someone else to do the work, and you take the money. So you run a Starbucks, or Starbucks is owned by whoever, shareholders or whatever, but let's ignore Starbucks, but let's have a coffee shop that's owned by one person, and they have some people making coffees, and they have to make X coffees in a day, sell X coffees in a day, X many coffees that they make, to pay their own wage. Okay, so they do that by midday, but then they have to stay for the rest of the day. They're contracted. If you don't stay for the rest of the day, you don't take any of your money home. Maybe you have to stay for another several hours to make more money. But all that money that you're making after you've made enough money to pay your salary for the day or wage, that's going to the owner. So this is just basically, making money off other people's backs. It's kind of slavery. But that's what's happening with galleries as well. When the gallerist is saying, no, I can't afford also your train fare to get to the opening exhibition. I can't afford also X, Y, Z. They're bleeding you dry of everything. So actually what they can afford to cover is really nothing of your experience as a painter, your cost of production, etc. sometimes. And that's all them squeezing out the expenses to maximize their profit. So, I think, it's an economic system in which we're all involved, but one does have a choice of how to play that, because there are the gallerists that are like, yeah, fair dues, I'm going to pay your production costs. Now, I'd wager that this happens a lot more with artists that already have some kind of collateral, i.e. they're already selling, or they're known to have money, because you don't generally piss people around with money who already have money, because they can just go somewhere else. So, these games are ones that one sees in Marxist economic theory. So, one is in two minds. It's a system we live in. So is anyone to blame? We shouldn't be accusing someone for being middle class. Well, probably not. But within that, there are still a whole lot of choices one can make. So I think one has to be balanced here. I don't think we can't really be calling out names, but we could still say, well, hey, maybe if you're a gallerist, think a bit about how you're managing these things. If you're calling yourself a political gallerist or gallerist that deals with left-wing art, for example, then you should probably be treating your artists, in some way that in line with your professed political leaning, or at least if you're going to be putting on shows of left-wing artists, then don't treat them like the worst kind of capitalist treats their workers. But also, I mean, if you're like the artist, the critic, the curator who's having a hard time, then this just is the capitalist system, that's being permitted. So is your gallerist also your arch enemy? They could maybe they could behave a bit better. You can have that conversation with them, but they are simply playing out a role that is permitted within society. So I think one has to get this in some perspective on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think like the art world is quite an interesting kind of example of an industry which involves people from all different. I mean, it's a relatively tiny industry, but it's one that involves people from all different classes, and the sizes of the relative galleries, that it changes vastly. So yeah, it's difficult to know really. I mean, I think there are a lot of smaller galleries that are more on a middle class scale, and I think it must be difficult for those galleries to break even. I don't even know how they do it. So, and then you have these mega galleries. So the smaller galleries take a lot of the heat as well, and I think it's probably important to kind of like maybe put the heat more on the bigger galleries than the smaller ones. Yeah, I mean that's just it's a different. I mean there seems to be there are all these different levels in the art world. I mean, I don't think. I mean, like the collectors are so wealthy. Some of the big collectors are so wealthy, aren't they? And so for the gallerists, they even though that they might be the big gallerists, I mean they must be incredibly wealthy, but their wealth seems like tiny compared to the billionaires, because the richest, it seems that the richest people, the most richest people in the whole world are very, very invested in art, owning art.
Well, yeah, that's one of their kind of investment portfolios, and there are reasons for that, like the portability of paintings, for example, makes them very popular for investments. You can just you can just ship one abroad or roll one up and take one with you somehow if you don't declare it. That's kind of useful if you're trying to evade tax, or if you're like in a hurry to shift some kind of high value stuff out of one country to another. Also, just the fact that it's quite hard for the taxman to say that you bought X painting and it cost X much money, or you paid X much money. It's kind of more difficult to differentiate than with a car or something, like a new car or something, or many other, or a house or something. So it's great for laundering money and for like avoiding taxes. And then it's just another part of your investment portfolio. So, you'll put some in painting, some in wine, some in housing, some in stocks. That's just smart if you've got a lot of money. So it's inevitably become part of investment portfolios, and rich people have a lot of art also for status reasons, because it looks good. I mean, in the sense that, hopefully it looks good, because art hopefully looks good, but it makes the person look good having this art. So that's basically, they are the reasons. We can maybe talk about that in another show. But yeah, I mean, it's the big hitters, it's the top of the system that are culpable. Maybe more, should we be talking about smaller galleries? Well, I don't know, because they vary so much. I think the difference in treatment from one gallery to another does indicate that whilst we can't put the blame for mistreatment of artists all on the smaller galleries that are the ones that are really struggling X many small galleries end up going bust a year. While we can't, I think the gallerist still has a choice. Also, the gallerist, can't they just say, I'll be having no more shows for 2 months? Rather than keeping doing the shows, it's the artist that ends up taking the financial pressure, not the gallerist, because they're just trying to basically, make up for difficult times in previous months or whatever. It's difficult. I can see why gallerists can't really suddenly just do half as many shows, even though during COVID that presumably is what's happening. But in normal times, they're trying to make money. If they've not made much money, they want to recuperate that loss, so the whole show must go on. But the more that's going on and they don't have money and they're losing money, the more they have to basically mistreat the artist and the workers in the gallery. So this is tricky. But I don't know, somewhere along the line, as someone who runs a business, you simply have to say, look, guys, I can't afford to do this. That has to be on them, not putting that onto the worker. In any other business, if you do that, you're just a shyster. Unfortunately, with artists, it's very tricky, because in a coffee shop, you can't really say, no, I'm paying half as many wages. I'm paying you only half as much for a month. You can't really do that. There's normally a contract in place. There's a minimum wage in many countries, etc. With artists, you don't really have the minimum wage even. So this is a very unprotected industry. That's one issue, I think.
Yes, exactly, and I guess that we're going to try and deal with some of those issues in forthcoming podcasts.
Yes.
Right.
Indeed, we will be looking at all these kind of things. There's a lot to break down. So things like, basically we'll be giving advice and also talking about our personal experience, talking about it in such a way that maybe makes you feel better to also have had similar experiences. And so maybe you can talk about it as well. Things like how to get work in the art world. Now, I've been a curator and a critic, so I have some experience. I've also taught art-related subjects in universities. How to get payments, this is a good one. I've always generally got paid, but me and Bobby both have bad experiences. There are ways of wording emails and ways of making sure you get paid. It can start with the initial process from the offset, making it very clear, maybe having contracts in place from the offset. Most times this will help you get paid. Sometimes you're dealing with somebody who really is unreasonable, but we'll get to that as well. But we'll talk about how to get payments, also just how to get that first paid job in the first place, because often people will say, we can give you this work, it'll be unpaid, but it's experience. Well, that can happen, but you don't really want that happening for years. You might have reasons to take that on, but let's talk about how you might actually get paid work. How to get critics to write about your work, which I know about, having been a critic. There's a few tricks there. How to deal with private views, again, we can go into more depth. How to deal with gallerists, collectors, and when I say deal with, I don't mean really in the negative connotation of the term, but also how to work with them. Working with curators, what do curators do? Maybe you want to be a curator. Is art school worth it? And is the Masters and PhD worth it? And many, many more subjects. Promoting yourself online. And we'll do a whole lot more, but we'll see how it goes from edition to edition. And if people are digging what we're doing, you can always get in contact and tell us what you need more of. Bobby.
Yeah, exactly. That all sounds good. So I look forward to sharing more.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This has been Down and Out in the Art World. I'm Mike Watson. My co-host here is Bobby Dowler, and we'll be back soon.